So, Henry Cejudo versus Payton Talbot just got announced for the main card of UFC 323. And it's a very unexpected matchup, so we're going to be discussing that a bit today. So, Talbot is coming off of a impressive bounce back win over Felipe Lima. However, before that, he lost a relatively dominant decision to Raoni Barcelos at the start of the year, where he was out grappled and outpaced. And while he did show some impressive improvements against Felipe Lima, to go from Lima to Cejudo is a very big jump. While on the other hand, Cejudo is coming off of a 3-fight loss streak. He had 3 years off. He fought Aljamain Sterling in a relatively competitive decision, lost to Merab, where he dominantly lost the last 2 rounds, and then he lost a very, very strange fight to Song Yadong, and Cejudo's expressed that this might be his last fight as he's getting repeatedly more and more injured, and you can kind of tell during his fights. As to how this matchup would go, it's really interesting because obviously a lot of people one, Talbot very recently got out wrestled and, grapple fucked, essentially. And I rewatched that fight, and Talbot did a lot better than I thought. It just really seemed like he struggled to balance on one leg and scramble in certain situations when Barcelos would shoot on a single leg, and it really just looked like Barcelos was, very big and very strong and was able to topple over Talbot's base. On the feet, Talbot still looked relatively good, finding good shots, defending where he could, and, still remaining in the fight. But Barcelos is a big dude, and he's really, really crafty. And he can hang. He's good. He's really good. And it just seemed like it was a bit much for Talbot. And against Felipe Lima, Lima is a damn good prospect. He beat Mohamed Naimov. I think he beat Brett Johns, I think his name is. Felipe Lima is very, very good. And Talbot, while he didn't necessarily look as deadly on the feet, he still looked very precise, but he showed significantly better takedown defense, offense, and scrambling ability where he was able to secure dominant position and maintain it for the majority of the fight. And those are improvements that you want to see. But is it enough to, compete with Henry Cejudo and to beat Henry Cejudo? So, Cejudo's style of wrestling, I think it's very, very important to take into consideration what style of grappling someone has in MMA. Cejudo is primarily a clinch trip specialist from the open, right? He doesn't often take people down up against the cage. It is often he will blitz in, strike with someone, grab, and go for an inside trip. And it's been a very, very long time since Cejudo's committed to his wrestling heavy because he wrestles like a wrestler. Now, I know that sounds dumb, and a lot of fighters come from wrestling. However, you see a lot of people adjust their style of wrestling for MMA. They will use the cage, they will use ground and pound, they will go for a lot of submissions, they will secure, dominant position for MMA, not for wrestling. So Cejudo doesn't seem to have ever really made that transition. He wrestles in MMA like a pure wrestler. He's very quick to scramble. He's very good at circling to the back, but not necessarily getting to the back. He doesn't work too much up against the fence, and he prefers to work out in the open. And we haven't really seen Talbot struggle with that. And I think against someone that is quite a bit bigger than him, not just in terms of height and length, but also in terms of frame, right? Talbot is a large bantamweight, and Cejudo, while, beefy, is a very short bantamweight. I think he's going to have a bit more trouble not only closing that distance, but, trying to offset Talbot's balance. I wouldn't really pin Cejudo as a wrestler in MMA anymore. he's very much reserved himself to sort of a karate point fighting style. However, that does sort of have some issues. Cejudo is noticeably small for the weight class, and covering distance is becoming increasingly difficult for him. And we've seen him struggle against the longer, bigger bantamweights, right? Aljamain Sterling gave him a lot of trouble with the kicks, the leg kicks especially, and just, again, putting stuff in range. And Song Yudong was able to outpoint him with sort of the power shots. Now, do I think that Payton Talbot is inherently more powerful than Song Yudong? No, I don't. But I think Talbot is a lot better at getting the finish and sort of sniping at your opponent. So I don't think that Cejudo trying to play that point fighting karate game is necessarily going to be very successful, because Cejudo is an orthodox fighter, and to do that sort of rear hand focused sort of style, you do kind of need to be in opposite stances. That's why you see a lot of counter fighters fight in southpaw. However, Cejudo doesn't do that. And the one thing is, Cejudo has an excellent chin, and I don't see him getting knocked out in this fight. However, he keeps his chin very, very high up at all times. And again, against a guy like Payton Talbot, Talbot will mix in the weapons really, really well, and I love shot selection. Now, both men do kind of wade into range, right? Talbot isn't very defensive. He will eat shots to give them. However, Talbot will throw elbows, body shots, flying knees, dynamic kicks, and he's very, very good at timing them appropriately. You saw against Cameron Simon, as soon as he tripped out Simon got back up and went to shoot in a takedown, and Talbot landed a knee perfectly. And while I don't expect Talbot to get really hungry with the knees in this fight, I think he'll more stay at range. His shot selection will make it really, really difficult for Cejudo to impose his will. And Barcelos did a really good job against Talbot getting dominant position, like mount, like having the back, like having back mount, getting the back, and doing damage from those positions, threatening chokes, landing ground and pound shots. Cejudo doesn't do that. I think I've maybe seen him pull one submission in his entire career, and that was against Marlon Moraes in the third round, where he essentially just turned it into a situation where he could use ground and pound after Moraes was incredibly gassed, not defending himself. We've seen Henry mainly ends up sitting in full guard as a result of his preferred wrestling techniques of the inside trip. So I don't really think that Cejudo is going to be able to get dominant position or maintain it, because he invites wrestling style scrambles so often. And the fact that Talbot is quite flexible, quite dynamic in his scrambles, I trust that he's going to be able to kind of work himself out of it. And while Cejudo is very much a crafty veteran, he doesn't necessarily have the sort of toolkit to implement sneaky kind of tactics. I just don't think, he has that anymore. And you also have to take into consideration, when Cejudo came back, he's fought about once a year. He came back a while ago, but he's been constantly getting injured. I understand he's had shoulder injuries. I understand he injured his forearm pretty badly. I understand, obviously, his eyes got gouged out pretty much. But Cejudo seems to really, really be struggling with, the injuries, and it's consistently keeping him out of action. And that has to be taken into consideration, because it is a consistent thing. And again, you're getting someone that is, very young, very green, so he can improve significantly between fights. You saw how quickly Talbot was able to improve from, January to June in terms of his takedown defense and his grappling IQ. So you've got someone that can improve very quickly, someone that has good power, that's tough, right? Cejudo really isn't able to do the same kind of damage to people at bantamweight as he could at flyweight. And I think, Talbot's on the higher end of toughness just due to his attributes. And I really just think it's a stylistic matchup where, yes, it's difficult for Talbot. Cejudo is very much crafty. He's tough. He's got experience. But I just don't really see many avenues where Cejudo can successfully implement his game. And even if he does, I don't really think it's the right kind of style to beat Talbot. I think if you want to beat Talbot, you do kind of need to be a pressure grappler that is, nearly the same size as him or bigger. Someone like a Merab Dvalishvili, an Umar Nurmagomedov, and obviously I understand I'm reaching very high up in the rankings here, but just in general, pressure style grapplers will give Talbot problems, and Cejudo is not that, and he hasn't really been a grappler for a very, very long time. So if I were to pick this fight, I'd have to go with Payton Talbot by decision, 29-28, maybe a 30-27. Maybe there's a round where Cejudo kind of gets his groove going in the third and realizes, okay, I might be retiring, I need to pick it up. But he just won't be able to do enough, and I think Talbot is going to break into the rankings and look really impressive doing so. So anyway, guys, I just wanted to make a, quickish little breakdown on my thoughts on Payton Talbot and this really interesting matchup, which I'm really looking forward to. That's probably one of my favorite fights on the card. So anyway, guys, I will see you later. Like, comment, and subscribe.